What's up, guys? I wanted to do a quick video on our sample LOI. So this is going to be posted in our school community in the classroom folder, and this is an LOI I'm actually going to start offering to people, and hopefully you guys can start using it. So I'm just going to run through it and go over the important parts that need to be in an LOI. So this is very important when you're going to put an offer on a property. You're going to start with a letter of intent. And this basically is an offer to a seller that says, hey, I'll buy the property under these particular circumstances. And there's parts of the LOI that are going to be important for you to include. Now, LOIs are not binding contracts. That's important to understand. They are merely an agreement to agree, which legally speaking is not necessarily enforceable. But in the industry, it's industry standard that once an LOI is submitted and accepted by a seller, that the terms really can't vary or change. And if they do, it's really operating in bad faith. So let's go through some of this LOI. So first thing, obviously, we want to include the purchase price, right? What is the price for the property and the proposed time frame? So we usually have here that the buyer is going to submit the purchase contract first to the seller. And if we're representing buyers, we always like to submit the purchase contract first, because that puts us in a better negotiating position. We say within 7 business days, gives us a little bit of wiggle room there. The effective date of the contract is always going to be the day that both buyer and seller sign it. Now, I'll do a different video on the importance of the effective date of a contract, because it's very important, because it kicks off all the other timelines. But that's going to be very important. So here's the other part. Seller is going to produce what we call the due diligence materials. And that time frame is called your inspection period. Your inspection period is typically 30 days, but what we always put in our law practice when we are representing clients, and obviously in our coaching program when we're mentoring students through the coaching program, is that the inspection period starts when the seller provides all of the requested due diligence materials. This is very important because sometimes you can sign a contract, seller takes 7 days to provide the information. Well, guess what? You've now lost 7 days of your inspection period. So it's very important that the inspection period starts upon delivery of all the due diligence materials, which is what we say right here. Now, we'll go to the Exhibit A, which includes the actual due diligence materials. It's important to say up front what you expect to be provided during after you get it under contract. That way there's no discrepancies between you and the seller. The closing date, obviously that needs to be stated. And any extension, here's the next thing. Is there an extension built in? Again, these are terms that are going to flow into the purchase contract, okay? Now, the typical deal is what we call 30-30-30, right? So 30 days for the inspection period, at which point your earnest money typically goes non-refundable. Then you have 30 days to close, right? So you really have 60 days from when you sign the contract to close. And then another 30 days for an extension. You usually have to pay for that extension. So that's 30, 30, and 30. So really from beginning to end, it's about 90 days. Your deposit within 3 business days. Here's something that's very, can be a little sneaky, but we want our deposit due. We want the time frame to be calculated in business days, not calendar days. And that's important because calendar days are obviously shorter, right? If we sign a deal on a Friday, an LOI on a Friday, or a purchase contract on a Friday, we're not going to count Saturday and Sunday when it comes to putting in our earnest money. We're going to list the title company. We have our own title company, so we like to just control the whole process. It's a lot easier and smoother. Title policy. Now, this will vary state by state. In Georgia, for instance, the buyer usually always pays for the title policy. All right. In Florida and in Texas, some parts of Florida rather, in Texas, I know for sure, seller always pays for the title policy. So that's something, again, you want to outline in the LOI, because if you're going after a very large deal, that can be a pretty penny of a cost that needs to be agreed upon up front. Speaking of cost, what are the closing costs and who's going to pay for it? That is very important to outline in your LOI. It should be easily agreed to and just flows right through to the purchase contract. Assignment. This is important for any wholesalers out there. The assignment, buyer needs to have the right to assign the contract to anyone. when we're syndicating a deal, we usually get it under contract with a particular holding company. And when we actually go to close, we're going to assign the purchase contract to our syndicated entity. And that syndicated entity is the entity that will actually close it, take title. So that's why we have the assignment. But we don't want any conditions on that assignment from the seller. We want to have the right to freely assign the contract at any time. Now, access. Seller has to agree to provide us, buyer, third-party access with reasonable notice to the properties, all right, throughout the inspection period. That's really not controversial. Now, financing contingency. These are not on every deal. A lot of times sellers will not agree to financing contingencies because they know that's an added risk for them that the deal may fall out of contract. If you're gonna go after a financing contingency as a buyer, it needs to be very broad. All right, it needs to be buyer's discretion. You're going to obtain financing, adequate financing at buyer's discretion. Okay, for a certain amount, 75%, 80%, something like that. Seller, if they're sophisticated, they have sophisticated counsel, they're going to come back and say, no, you gotta notify us of the financing by the end of the inspection period. So really, it's no harm to them because it coincides with the inspection period, and you have to get a specific financing at a specific rate. And if you don't get that, then you can terminate. They want to limit your financing contingency, whereas the buyer wants to make it very broad. And that's a real distinction that will just need to be negotiated during the inspection period, or I'm sorry, while you're getting the deal under contract. Now, this proviso clause, these are a couple clauses at the end here that really confirms that this is not a binding agreement. The seller understands purchase price is determined based on past and current financial information supplied by the seller, the same being an accurate representation. That's important because if you get in there, you get it under contract, and all of a sudden the rent roll is very different and the income's lower than you think. Well, you're already under contract. What are you going to do? And I actually posted another video about how to deal with retrades. And we can talk about that during our weekly Q&A calls. Usually leave a time period for the seller to accept it and sign it. People don't really adhere to that. If it takes them 2 weeks, you're going to get a signed LOI. You're going to accept it. And so the LOI is signed. And so we have signature pages here at the end. The buyer obviously signs it, submits it to the seller. Once the seller executes it, you are under LOI. You're not under contract. Now, this is an important distinction. I hear a lot of people say, oh, I'm under contract. But really what that means is they're under LOI. They've submitted an LOI or they have an LOI accepted. But that is the first start, the first step towards buying your first or your 100th property is going through this LOI process. Now, I didn't add the actual due diligence materials here because this LOI is intended to be used for all sorts of types of properties, whether it's industrial or multifamily or self-storage. It doesn't really matter, hotels, but typically you're going to want to get tax returns. You're going to want to get financial statements, profit and loss statements. Here's something that is always controversial, and it shouldn't be, is bank statements, okay? You always want to ask the seller for bank statements to tie into the rent roll that they're providing you and the financial statements that they're providing you. Financial statements are typically generated through Microsoft Excel. Microsoft Excel can be manipulated. Bank statements, bank deposit statements cannot. So as long as that Excel spreadsheet, that P&L that you receive matches the bank statements, then you're golden. If a seller pushes back and doesn't want to give you bank statements, I consider that a red flag. I've had a $25 million deal terminate for that very reason. So it's very important to include bank statements in your due diligence materials. You'll also include stuff here like the survey, if there's a current survey, if there's a current title policy that they may have, utility bills, maintenance logs for properties, service requests, insurance loss runs, right? Have there been any claims on the property, and things like that? And you can tweak it to specific deals, but the point is you include the Exhibit A in the LOI so that when it comes time to deliver the due diligence materials, which again, this Exhibit A is going to be carried over into the purchase contract, there's not going to be a dispute. People are going to know exactly what they need to deliver. So I hope you guys use this LOI. If you have any questions on how to utilize letter of intent in your acquisition strategy, please let me know. I'm happy to talk about this on our Q&A calls. Just reach out to me if you have any questions. Let's go.